Lake appropriation. Ted, are you it?
Yes, thank you, Director George. Ted Kowalski, CWCB, for the record. And I have with me today Susan Schneider from the Attorney General's Office and Suzanne Sellers and Eric Skye have both been working on this issue with me. And we've spoken to the board about Bear Creek Reservoir for a number of board meetings now, about the fact that the Army Corps of Engineers had conducted a reconnaissance study looking at a reallocation of storage space at Bear Creek Reservoir. And they've looked for a cost share partner, and that this board has acted, I think, at the last board meeting to include funding to be that cost share partner with the Army Corps of Engineers. It's modeled after the Chatfield reallocation process, and that is in the draft bill that I think they're still drafting over at the legislature in our typical construction fund bill, and that is ongoing. In the context of the study, we're also involved with a reasonable diligence case for the two different water rights that we hold at Bear Creek Reservoir, one for 2,000 acre feet, another one for just a little bit less than 2,000 acre feet, for a whole host of purposes. And we are pursuing those diligence cases as we've talked to the board about in past board meetings. In addition, in the context of this reallocation and the reconnaissance study that the Army Corps of Engineers has conducted, they've identified up to 20,000 acre feet of additional water that could be stored at Bear Creek Reservoir. And in light of the water plan that was just recently adopted and our goal of obtaining up to 400,000 acre feet of additional storage within the state of Colorado, from the staff level, we're certainly interested in exploring 20,000 acre feet of storage that exists with existing infrastructure and just would require reallocation and mitigation and conversations with the city of Lakewood and other stakeholders. We have had a number of meetings with the city of Lakewood, and we've had meetings with initial meetings with potential water providers or water users who would use the bucket, and those are continuing. But we thought it would be appropriate at this point in time to bring to you the decision whether to declare your intent to appropriate up to 20,000 acre feet of storage water or of storage at Bear Creek Reservoir. And we certainly would continue to have additional conversations with water providers that may be the ultimate end users, and also with the city of Lakewood that has an important recreational component there at the lake, and we've been having those conversations for the last several months, but our intent at the staff level would be to continue those conversations and explore how we might be able to use this bucket for some other purposes, but also to preserve and perhaps even enhance the recreational value of the reservoir. With that, I think Lindsay has put up the staff recommendation that we have included in the Mara, it's time for me to leave. Put up the staff recommendation, and we put it there for your consideration. But I know that there are a couple of folks from the city of Lakewood that have traveled down from there to our meeting to make some comments, and they've also provided you with a letter that we provided to you. And I'm certainly willing to answer any questions, and I would appreciate the opportunity for Lakewood to make their comments. Thank you.
Okay, before we go to the members of the public, any discussion or questions for Ted? Nothing for now. Okay, gentlemen, you're welcome to come forward. Or if you're together, you can choose between yourselves who wants to go first, but you're both free to give comments to us. Please come and tell us who you are and what you want us to hear.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board on this agenda item. My name is Vince Castile. I represent the city of Lakewood. I'm a senior civil principal civil engineer for the city of Lakewood. Have you all received the letter, and have you had a chance to read through it thoroughly? Okay, I'm not going to read the letter to you because I don't think that would be productive. I just want to hit the high points. Of the four major points that we have in the letter, I'm going to address three of them, and then I'll let Drew speak to the park impacts, because that's what we've really honed in on is we've been working well with Ted, and it's been a very good relationship. I want to thank Ted for that. But it really came into focus with us when we saw at our last meeting on March 4th what the footprint of a 22,000 acre foot storage reservoir would look like in Bear Creek, and what the dramatic impacts would have on the park. And again, Drew will talk on those a little bit later. But at this time, Lakewood opposes the proposed appropriation and respectfully requests the board to not move forward at this time. Further, the city cannot support the proposed reallocation of capacity in the reservoir for other uses than those currently in place at the current permanent pool level. Of the three bullet points, the first one is one we feel fairly strongly about, along with the park. The park is the main driver of what we feel are going to be the impacts of the park, but a study of this nature was done in the 1980s, and the participant at that time, the Water Board, Colorado Water Conservation Board, was part of that study, and basically it was evaluated at great expense to Lakewood and other partners, water users in the district, and at that time it was determined to be infeasible due to a combination of costs, environmental impacts, and lack of reliable yield. And part of that would be the fluctuation in the pool. The second item that I want to cover, which is number 3 in your letter, is the requested appropriation we believe at this time is premature and could possibly violate Colorado's anti-speculation doctrine with water rights. The last point that I will cover briefly is, again, we think that the yield of new storage appropriation will be limited at best and will obviously reduce or impact the flood control capacity of the facility. With that, if there are any questions for me, or I can have Drew do his presentation, then we can both be present for questions.
Any questions for Mr. Castile? Okay, let's have Drew come on up then.
Good afternoon, and like Vince, thank you for letting us speak today. My name is Drew Sprafke. I am the Regional Park Supervisor for the City of Lakewood, which includes Bear Creek Lake Park. And I just want to talk about, from the city's perspective, like Vince said, when we saw what the footprint would potentially be to the park with the 22,000 acre feet of extra storage, it definitely brought home to us that there would be a tremendous and potentially devastating impact to the park. And that is a lot of the reason why the city is opposing the reallocation at this time. Our park, as many of you know, is part of the Tri-Lakes project of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which includes Chatfield and Cherry Creek. But unlike those two reservoirs, the state did specifically request the city of Lakewood to take over the management and financial responsibility of Bear Creek Lake Park back in 1982. And since that time, we have put many millions of dollars into the creation of the park, into the improvement of the amenities, and we have actually created it into a very important regional recreational amenity. We get about 420,000 visitors a year. About a quarter of those are from outside of Jefferson County, and we have annual pass holders from multiple outside states. We have lots of recreational opportunities, and looking at this potential reallocation, it would at minimum dramatically alter the character of the park, and at maximum dramatically reduce our capacity for recreation. The main things that we would see is that a lot of our recreational facilities would be inundated, and while we realize that this would be mitigated under the plan, we don't see that there's enough remaining territory within the park after the 22,000 feet to actually effectively mitigate those recreational activities. So we do foresee losing a significant amount, particularly our land-based recreation, such as mountain biking, horseback riding, hiking, and wildlife observation, which are very popular year-round activities. We do not foresee being able to replace all of those amenities with that additional recreation. And then there's always the possibility to change the character of the park to a water-based recreation, but a big concern from the city of Lakewood is that this reservoir would then have a very significant fluctuation in water levels, and it would be very difficult to adequately plan for recreation if you cannot plan to have consistent water supply. And you would potentially have very costly facility development to have facilities for different water levels, and it would be very difficult to attract users to a lake that could change that dramatically. Additionally, we think there would be significant impacts to both our environment and our wildlife habitat. And while we recognize again that this would be mitigated, the park itself would be significantly reduced in size to the point where we do not think it would be feasible to mitigate those within the park. So for example, our riparian and our wetland areas, they would probably have to be mitigated outside of the park, and that would continue to dramatically alter the character and the mission of our park, which could potentially reduce our visitation and make us completely change our mission of that facility. So with those said, those are our particular concerns about it. Again, we just foresee that it would have a dramatic and again, potentially devastating impact on our character and our recreational values of the park. So, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? I don't see anything. Okay, thank you very much. Ted, anything else?
No, nothing further. I think you have the staff recommendation. If there's any questions for staff after those presentations, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Director McLeod.
Ted, we've already decided to put together this feasibility study, assuming that the General Assembly makes that appropriation. That will go forward, right? And remind me when that'll be finished.
Yes, that study, it was estimated by the Army Corps of Engineers would take perhaps 4 or possibly 5 years of work. They do have this new approach where they try to accomplish these types of studies for under $3 million within 3 years, but they've already indicated that they would expect they would need an exemption from that because this is a little bit more complicated and it would take perhaps longer than 3 years, and it would perhaps also surpass that 3 million. Their estimate was about $5 million in probably 4 or 5 years.
Would that study address some of the concerns that Lakewood has expressed, particularly with regard to their amenity? I'm not concerned about speculation. That's a different issue, but they've made some compelling points in this letter about the loss of their amenity and the millions they've invested and so on. Is this feasibility study going to address those issues, or am I missing something?
Thank you, Director McLeod. Yes, from our perspective, we've included the City of Lakewood literally from the sign go, and we want to continue to work with them and the Army Corps of Engineers and other interested stakeholders to see what the impacts may be and how they could be mitigated. And what we're asking the board to do today is merely declare their intent to appropriate the water should we go forward with the reallocation after the requisite study that we just talked about. So I think from the staff's perspective, there is significant amount of time to be able to explore the possible problems or issues that may arise from such a reallocation, address them appropriately, or there's also other things that could occur in the context of that study that would, I think, that would drive sort of where that reallocation would go in terms of the sizing, for example. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 20,000 acre feet reallocation or bucket. We're going to learn that through that study, honestly, as to what would be the appropriate amount. We think it's prudent to file for a conditional water right for up to that amount, and then allow that study to go forward from there.
I understand the desire to be forward thinking and create additional storage for the future of the state, but I'm a little concerned that we're getting ahead of ourselves, and we don't know the answers to all these questions. Even the concerns that Lakewood raises are speculative. I mean, this could be the result. It may not be the result. We aren't going to know the answers for 5 years, but we're going to file an application this year. I don't quite understand the sequence here.
Certainly, Director McLeod. I think that's exactly what the conditional water right process is set up to do. It's allow you to put your place in line and say, hey, we're thinking about this. And then as you go forward, you can protect it from other interveners or interlopers, if you will. I think it's, from at least my perspective, coming off the water plan where we've identified this very large gap, potential gap between water supplies and demands. We have to, as a board, be forward-thinking and exploring every option that we can to help meet that water supply demand imbalance. And this one is from my perspective, one we absolutely should be looking at, and preserving our ability to, as the state of Colorado, help figure out how that water would be divvied up within sort of the Platte River Basin. I mean, we see that in the context of the Chatfield reallocation, for example.
Thank you.
Any further discussion or questions, Director Smith? Oh, Director Wells.
I think I agree with both sides. In other words, I can see where we would need to file for a conditional water right for 2016 to the extent that the Corps believes that some space might be available. On the other hand, I also think that having a conditional water right doesn't mean you're ever going to get approval of a project for that amount. That doesn't guarantee anything, frankly, but rather that we would work through the NEPA type process to make sure that we don't, in fact, impact too adversely the Bear Creek Lake Park, which does seem to be different than Chatfield. For one thing, it's a lot smaller. And so that it's not our goal, to those of you from Lakewood, to ruin the park. That's not the point. So I'm sure there will be some balance between how large the ultimate storage might be and the value of the park and its recreational amenities. So 20,000 most likely is not the ideal number. We would file for what the Corps believes might be available and then work through the practicalities of the impact on the park and that sort of thing.
Further discussion? What's your pleasure? The staff has proposed a recommendation. It's printed in your materials and it is now on the screen. Director Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the first step in a long journey, and we're on the wave of the water plan. And I think it's the charge of this board to plan for the future. It has lots of uncertainties. I would hope the city of Lakewood would be a strong partner in this process to identify what your needs are as we go through this process, and hopefully not be a adversary. But I think this is a great first step. What other water users and the future depends on this board taking the leadership of developing, protecting. It goes along with our mission. I remember the uncertainty of when the board committed to the Chatfield reallocation process. And now we're seeing the benefits. It has uncertainty. It makes us nervous. But Mr. Chairman, if we're ready, I would move approval of staff recommendation as presented.
Motion has been made by Director Smith. Is there a second? Seconded by Director Wattenberg. Is there discussion on the motion? None appearing. Are we ready for the vote? All in favor of the motion, which is to adopt staff recommendation, please say aye. All opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you. So we're finished with the agenda. We're not quite finished for the day.
But all business is completed that's been noticed. But our friend has something he would like to say to wind up. So Ted, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Director George. I just wanted to take a few minutes at the tail end of this board meeting to reflect and to thank each one of you. It has been a true privilege and an honor to work with each one of you, to represent you, and to do the work that we do. I think that this board is the most important board in the state of Colorado, bar none. And you take your charge seriously, you work tirelessly, and you're always looking for solutions that work for the state of Colorado and do it in ways that you're forming partnerships. And I can't tell you enough how much I'm taking from the board, how much I've taken from the board. I've learned a tremendous amount, and it's really part of who I am. I mean, you are my family, and I'm not going to do a Becky Mitchell impression. At least I'm going to try not to. I think about the friendships, and I think about our good friend Diane, and you guys are not just friends, you're real family. And there's a quote that friends are like stars, that you can't always see them, but they're always there. And I feel that way about this board and about Diane and about the staff that I've been able to work with. I think you know what an amazing staff you have, but I can't tell you, you don't know the even just a little bit of it. I mean, they are incredible. The hours they put in, the passion that they have for the issues they work on. You're lucky to, and I've been lucky to work with such a great, hardworking, passionate group of professionals, and they're also a lot of fun. Moving forward, I've been thinking a lot over the last year or two that and you'll pardon the analogy a little bit. I'm not saying, well, I've been thinking with Peyton's recent retirement, I've been thinking, oh, that's where I'm headed. I'm like Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos. I got a couple more years and that's where I'm going. But it turns out I'm more like Peyton Manning when he left the Colts and he came to Denver for the productive years and won the Super Bowl and went out on top. And I have a lot to give and a lot of productive years ahead of me. And I'm looking forward to working with you in this new role, because I think our paths will continue to cross in this new role in a lot of ways. And I'm excited about the opportunity and proud to have the CWCB be where I came from and take with me as I go. Mostly the last couple of days, at least, I've been looking back, and I just put a couple of different things up on the screen to remind myself a little bit about just what I've done over these last 20 plus years. And I've attended more than 109 meetings, more than 100 meetings, from Meeker to Lamar to Durango to Sterling and everywhere in between. And in 2006, completed the South Platte Recovery Program. I mean, that had been going on for years, and I just sort of came in at the right time, but it was a real honor to get to work on that, and with Don and Diane and others, Dave Little, and it was a lot of fun. And then representing Colorado in some of the negotiations with the 07 guidelines. I've witnessed the creation of these RICDs or ricketies, whatever you want to call them, and we've got them all over the state. And I've got the scars to prove that I was part of that conversation for many years, along with my good friend Susan Schneider and Suzanne and others. Helped the board appropriate dozens of in-stream flows when I was in the in-stream flow section and at the Attorney General's office before that. Oversaw the Colorado River Basin study in 2012, and then this Wild and Scenic Alternatives group, which I think is a real testament to how collaboration is the wave of the future and not litigation or things like that. It's really partnerships and bringing people together and figuring out the right way to go. Of course, represented Colorado as an advisor on the UCRC, the UC RIP, the San Juan RIP, the Platte RIP, the Glen Canyon Dam, adaptive management work group meetings in the Basin States, and then most recently in the Mexico negotiations, which has been incredible, an incredible honor to get to do that. And I appreciate the opportunity and the confidence that you put in me. That process in particular has resulted in a promotion that you would not even contemplate, and it's not where I'm going with the Walton Family Foundation, but rather we have this sludge gate that we use to avoid going through the Tijuana border, and we had to apply for these cards to be able to use this gate and avoid the 2-hour wait at the border. And so recently they gave me an ID card, and they said, I'll just read it there. Enclosed is your ID card issued to you in your status as chief for the United States and Mexico. So it was, so I don't know that this letter will get me anything more except for across the gate in between the two countries, but I thought that was pretty funny and thought I'd share it with you. And finally, I think you know how important my family is to me, and I'm really, I can't tell you, they are. My wife is my rock, and my son is this amazing baseball player and really intelligent kid, and my daughter is smart and witty and charming and beautiful, and I really am lucky to have them, and they're something. And last year around this time, we got to go to Hawaii and we went ziplining. And I'm not going to say that I'm afraid of heights, but I don't prefer to be at high places. And we went ziplining, and this is just a picture of me and my daughters were jumping off, and it just is a good analogy, I think, for me jumping off from 21 years of working for the state. And it's sometimes hard, and you sometimes are just sad about leaving and the friendships that you're leaving behind, but sometimes the best thing to do is just jump and enjoy the ride. And so with that, so anyhow, so thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Ted, thank you, and you'll be missed greatly, but you really need to come around often. We'll always want to see you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there a motion? There's only one item of business left. Motion's been made. Is there a second? The motion is for adjournment. Is there any discussion? None appearing. All in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carried. We are adjourned until